Merry Christmas from Gritty Claws. Today's video is going to be a little bit different with the holiday break coming up. The way the schedule works out, there isn't a lot of value to be had in playing the schedule and maximizing game volume. So today we'll look at some month-long trends and guys who have been consistently rising week over week. But before we jump to that, let's take a look at the schedule for week 12. Now, a couple teams play a few times. There's 45 games this week crammed into only 5 days. You can see here no games Monday or Tuesday. So then you got 14 Wednesday, 4 on Thursday, 9 Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Every team plays 3 times except for the ones you see on the bottom left. Vancouver only has 1 game. That is a light night game, as you can see here. But they only have 1 game this entire week. So if you have Demko, Pettersson, Miller, Hughes, you'll need to bolster your roster this week with some waiver adds to try to get through the week. Only 1 light night, and that is Thursday the 28th. As you can see here, the schedule is for that night. Montreal taking on Carolina. You got LA and Vegas, the Flyers and Canucks, and the Oilers and the Sharks. So those are the teams that you could potentially stream from, but it's only 1 game, and as I mentioned, the Canucks only play 1 time this week. And a couple of these teams like Vegas only plays twice. So you're not going to want to pick up guys from those teams. So we're not going to do what we usually do and look at those teams specifically. Instead, what we're going to do is take a look at the month of December. From December 3rd until the 24th, basically a 3-week stretch. Who have been the players that have been consistently improving week over week, and how much have they been improving? That's what we're going to look at in the next slide, and we'll take a look at it with a little bit of a different visualization, and we'll go by different metrics. We'll start with some of the top players. We'll look at some players that are 70% ownership and below, and then we'll take a quick look at the goaltending as well. So what you're looking at now is a dashboard I threw together this morning. It's all only players that have improved every week since December 3rd. So they improved December 3rd to the 10th to the 17th, and the 17th to the 24th. So that's all of those players are what make up this data set. And what you're looking at is a slicer here for completeness rating. We'll use that in a little bit. An ownership percentage slicer. We also have a player name filter. And then over here, you've got the top statistics from the last 3 weeks. And obviously, there's guys like McKinnon, 2.18 points per game, which is insane, 24 points in 11 games. You've got Matthews, who's at a goal and a half per game over the last 8 games, 16 points, 2 points per game in that span. You've got William Nylander, who's right up there at 1.78 points per game. Obviously, Kucherov, McDavid, they're at the top, and we'll go through some of these guys as we go a little bit further into this analysis. Down here, you've got a rating trend. So if I click on a player's name, we'll look at Rasmus Dahlin, for example. You can see at the beginning of the month, he was an 89, basically a 90, but very complete in general, but he's still been climbing to a 90, 92, and up to a 93. He is currently the highest rated completeness rating on the Player Hub at a 93.14. He's extremely complete. In addition to the stats you see here, 9 points in the last 10 games, 3 power play points, 2 power play goals, 3.7 shots per game, and then it's also coming on the back of 2.03 hits per game and 1.97 blocks per game. So incredibly complete across every metric. So if you're in a categories league, he's been an absolute gold mine in terms of category coverage and point production. Obviously, we've got McKinnon here. He's been improving. And what's interesting to note about all these guys at the top, this is sorted by completeness rating. So these are the most complete players in fantasy, some of them, and they're still gaining. So you can see the gap here for McKinnon. He goes from an 87, 88, 89, all the way up to a 91.5, thereabouts. And that just comes on the tail of this incredible production that he's been putting up. Basically a goal per game, over an assist per game, and then he's 2.18 points per game, which is crazy. 44 shots, so about 4 shots per game. And his shooting percentage is relatively high, but it's not crazy high. So it's 22%. That is potentially sustainable for a longer period of time. It's not like 40%, which would be unsustainable. So these are the guys that have been getting it done, but they're obviously owned up. So let's take a look at some other guys. Mackenzie Weegar is one of those guys that you wouldn't necessarily expect, but he's the 7th highest rated player on the completeness ratings. And he's been relatively productive, mainly for peripherals. You can see 7 points in his last 10, 22 shots, so 2.2 shots per game. Shooting percentage is okay. Plus minus is pretty decent there if you have that category as well, but you can go from an 85, 86, 87, just a nice steady progression up to an 88. And he's 94th percentile in blocks per game at 2.5. He's 84th percentile in hits per game at 1.7. And then he's, 97th percentile in terms of goals for defensemen. 0.24 goals per game for a defenseman is really good. So that's bolstering his completeness rating. But he's been very complete all season long, and he's been improving week over week. As you can see, he's in this data set going basically a nice steady increase, basically a straight line all the way up. So he's a guy, he's 86% owned. If you don't have him, or if he's available on your waiver wire, and you can potentially go out and pick him up, that would be a definitely must-own player. And we'll get to a bunch more of those types of players as we start to filter this data. But just giving you a sense of some of the top guys, you can see the stats up at the top here. Mika Zibanejad, he's been going off, so 16 points in his last 10 games. He is a -2 because a lot of what he does comes on the power play, which is good for fantasy. 8 power play points, 4 power play goals. And then 26 shots is not crazy. He is shooting 30%, which is a little bit high, but this is a nice kind of regression or progression up towards his average because he was well below that. I think he had 2 points in the month of November up until the point where I was featuring him in that video a couple weeks ago as a buy low candidate. So he's been popping off. And then obviously we have Nick Ehlers here, who we'll get into in just a minute. But before we go any further, let's take a look. A lot of these guys are owned up. You can see 100% ownership, 99% ownership, 98 for Zibanejad, Kaprizov, Stamkos, Robertson. So let's take a look at some guys that you can potentially own, and we'll just bring this down to a 70. Now, as we filter to 70% ownership and below, one thing you want to take a look at is the stats up here. You've got Nick Ehlers at 14 points in 9 games, 1.56 points per game. Over those last 9 games, you got Gabe Vilardi right behind him, 13 and 9, 7 goals in that span as well. Neither of these guys getting that much power play production, but they're getting a bunch of shots. Their shooting percentage is high, but not crazy high. Their plus minus is really good, plus 16, plus 12. I don't know if that's actually factually accurate. I'm going to have to double check that for you. But with that said, the point per game numbers are crazy high. The goal per game is really good. You're getting an assist per game out of Ehlers, and these guys are available for you on the wire. As we scroll through some of these, you can see there's Ehlers. Here's his progression from a 51. This was basically before the Kyle Connor injury, up to a 55, up to a 60, now a 61. Not the most complete player in general, but he has been extremely productive. And this is a guy that I was talking about last week. The Jets had a pretty decent schedule. I said the best 2 ads for last week were going to be Ehlers and Vilardi, and they definitely have been. Ehlers doesn't really hit or block, which is why his completeness rating is relatively low, but he's 90th percentile in point per game, 85th in goals, 88th in assists, 88th in shots, 59th in power play production, 59th percentile, I should say. So he's getting it done even strength, and that's a good thing in terms of continuing this production. If he can get some power play points in there for us, that'll be really helpful. But he is well over a point per game. He's been killing it right now. And then he's 69% owned, so he's probably not available for everyone in all different league sizes. So you could go a little bit further down and try to find some value on Gabe Vilardi, who is another guy who's been red hot, who we just mentioned. Unfortunately, I can't find Vilardi's file on here. There's been a number of different data sources in this, so it's very hard to make sure that everybody didn't fall through the cracks on this one. So don't have Vilardi, but you can take my word for it. He's been improving week over week because he's in this data file. So he's been killing it lately, and those 2 guys are still ownable. I believe Vilardi is around 25% owned. Let me just look at it real quick. He is 60% owned now. So he's been jumping up in the ownership percentages. He was around 29 a week or 2 ago when I was doing that video on the Winnipeg Jets. So he's been, one of those guys that I mentioned, and if you got out in front of it, he's been very productive for you. But if you didn't, it may be too late in certain league formats, but 60% owned, he might be there for you in some shallow leagues, and that would definitely be worth the ad. Now, next down, you have Robert Thomas, 14 points and 10. He also slipped through the cracks on this one, but 14 points and 10 is going to be good no matter who you are. And then on top of that, Robert Thomas has been really productive basically over the last month or so, maybe even further than that. He's got 13 goals, 24 assists on the season. He's over a point per game. And he's one of those guys that I've had on one of my rosters for a number of weeks, and it's just sort of like a stream that I picked up for 1 week, and he ended up playing extremely well during that span. Now, because I don't have his progression chart over here, let's take a look at his player hub. You can see 96th percentile, 1.12 points per game, 96th percentile in assists per game, 88th in goals per game. The shot volume is a little bit low at 2.18, but it's still pretty decent. And then the power play numbers are still pretty good. This was a guy that I mentioned last week. There's only like a handful of players in the league that have more even strength points than Robert Thomas. So he's been extremely productive 5-on-5, which isn't the best for fantasy because you do like those power play points. But with all that said, he has been over a point per game for a long time now. And he was over the last 3 weeks with 14 points in his last 10. And then a half a goal per game at that. And the shot volume is not that crazy high. So he could potentially build on this after the coaching change. If he can get some more ice time, some more looks on the power play, he could still improve from that point. And that would be an interesting place to pick him up. He's currently 64% owned, so he may not be there for you in every league format. But if he is there for you, you definitely should take a look at him. Now, another guy you should have probably looked at by now is Mikael Granlund. He's a 77 on the completeness rating, which is something I did not expect, but you can see it here. He took a huge jump from the 3rd to the 10th, 67 to a 74. That was that 1 week I featured him on the channel. He was going off, and not only was he playing really well in terms of offense, it's very assist heavy, but he was playing really well, but he was also hitting. On the season, he's 0.89 hits per game, 0.81 blocks per game. So a little bit of peripheral coverage that you didn't expect from Granlund. That particular week, I believe he was up over 1.5 hits per game, which is kind of crazy for him. So this was a really interesting file for a couple weeks now. He is dual position eligible, and he's only 37% owned, so he's still a pretty decent ad. If you're looking for Sharks ads, there's not a whole lot to look at other than Hurdle and Granlund, maybe Duclair, a couple of other guys, and one other guy that we'll look at in a little bit. But Granlund is probably the best ad for you there. Shooting percentage is still really low, so only 2 goals in the 10 games. So he does have the ability to improve upon that at that 7% shooting percentage. So if you still want to go out and grab a guy like Granlund, a 3-game week this week, but he's been really productive over the last 3 weeks and improving every single week. Now we'll just quickly scroll through this and show you some of the other leaders up at the top here. You got Buchnevich, who's a point per game over the last 3 weeks. You got Sharon Govich, who went crazy hot for about a week or two there, and you can see Sharon Govich over here, he's been improving week over week by leaps and bounds, 40 to a 48 to a 57, and then up now to a 59, basically a 60. And so he's been getting it done, and a lot of goal production out of him. 2 power play points, a power play goal, 26% shooting, so it's high, but not. It could be, a little bit of a regression off of that, but he's still been getting an opportunity, and it's finally starting to happen for Sharon Govich in Calgary. They were waiting on him to get productive, and kind of at the opposite time. So Toffoli's gone cold, Sharon Govich gets hot. Those are the 2 guys involved in that trade. And this is one of those players that you can find on your waiver wire, 29% owned. So if he's available, he may not be the best season-long ad, but for right now, he's been relatively hot. You also have Chinakhov here. And you can see down here, Chinakhov, I believe, is relatively low ownership at 9%. So he's been improving basically 7 points every week. So 50 to a 58 to a 65, now topping out at a 67, 10 points in his last 10, 6 goals. That's kind of what he's known for. And he's one of those goal scorers that gets hot. And when he gets hot, he can ride that out for a little bit. He would be definitely an ad in most league formats at 9% ownership. He's probably there for you. You could also go with Kirill Marchenko, same team, slightly lower production in terms of points, same amount of goals, and you're getting a couple more power play goals out of Marchenko. He's been that guy on the power play for a little bit now. With Laine not necessarily being productive, Marchenko has stepped up. He's top 6, he's getting power play 1 time, and he is a prolific goal scorer. He had that hat trick over the past week or so, and he's been jumping up. So 65, 67, 69, now up to almost a 70. Those 2 guys would be the top targets offensively for the Columbus Blue Jackets. But there are other guys that you can find. One of these guys that we need to talk about is Jake McCabe. So 8 points in his last 9 games, a power play goal, 9 shots. So not a lot of shot volume out of him. And he is known more for his peripheral coverage than for his points. And that would be the reason why we're featuring him here, because you would normally own him for his hits and blocks coverage, 2.08 hits per game, 1.6 blocks per game. But then on top of that, with the injuries that they have on that blue line, he's been getting more of an opportunity offensively, and he's been cashing in. So almost a point per game, 0.89 points per game in this 9-game span. He does have 0.78 assists per game, which is really nice. That's about double his season-long average of 0.36. So he's been much more productive, at least in terms of getting the assist coverage. He's been getting a little bit of power play time. And at 19% ownership, this is a hits and blocks D that you definitely want to add right now while he's still offensively productive. So this is definitely a guy that I would take a look at with the injuries that they have on that blue line. If you can't get him, I don't know if we mentioned him before, but Brock Faber, he's been another guy that's been offensively productive, 8 points in his last 11. The shooting percentage is really low, so this goal number could potentially increase. He's been playing over 25 minutes a game, improving week over week, taking 2 huge jumps from the 3rd to the 10th, and then from the 17th to the 24th. 2 huge jumps from a 62 to a 67 most recently, and he's been one of those guys getting an elevated role, and they kind of needed that because they have some injuries with Spurgeon and Brodin in and out of the lineup. So this is another target for you. He's 24% owned. So a lot of these guys are available in even a 12-team league. Some of these guys I've been streaming over that time span. Another D you could look at would be Thomas Harley. Similar type of thing where he's been getting a little bit more power play time. 7 points in his last 10. 4 of those are goals. That's going to be extremely valuable in terms of defensemen scoring goals for you. And that would be one of the reasons why he's jumped up so much higher in the completeness rating. He's 100th percentile for defensemen in goals per game, 0.31 on the season. 9 goals in 29 games for Thomas Harley. That is really impressive, and that is one of the reasons why he's jumped up so much. So he's 76th percentile in blocks, 1.86 blocks per game. The shot volume is low at 1.55. The power play production isn't crazy high. He's got 2 power play points on the year, one of those coming in the last 10 games. But for whatever reason, he's been very productive offensively, scoring goals. And that 21% shooting is a little bit high. It could potentially come back down, but that is still in the range where guys can ride that out for a little bit. So this is definitely a guy I would add in a 12-team league. He's only 14% owned, and he's close to a 69 in terms of completeness rating. So this is definitely a guy that you want to take a look at in a 12-team league and beyond. There's a number of other guys we could look at here. Somebody we do have to touch on is William Eklund. Again, the Sharks are not the most sought-after team to find players from. Eklund has been coming on recently, though. 7 points in his last 9. Only 19 shots in that time span, 10% shooting, so that could potentially increase. He does have the 2 goals in the 9 games. That could potentially increase, as I just mentioned. But he's been getting a little bit more power play time, 2 power play points in that span, and a huge jump from a 52 to a 59, now sitting at a 61.93, basically a 62. Not the most complete player, but at 7% ownership, this is a guy that you could potentially find some value in because the Sharks, nobody wants the Sharks, and it represents that with their ownership percentage. You can see Granlund would be the number 1 ad. You have Hurdle there. He's in the mid-40s, I believe. And he's one of the better guys that you can pick up off of San Jose. Granlund would be the next guy, and then Eklund would be the next guy that you could add. These are potentially all available in 12-team leagues depending on how your league shakes out and if the guys in your league are paying attention to the Sharks, because if they're not, you could definitely add some value there. Now, a guy that we need to talk about in terms of defensemen is David Savard. You can see here very flat, but he did improve. And then a nice jump there and a huge jump there. And that comes on the back of a 5 points in 6 games stretch and 3 goals in that span on only 7 shots. So his shooting percentage is unreasonably high. But the main reason you would own him is for hits and blocks. And if you're trying to target him for that reason and you're also getting some goal production, that's going to be money in the bank. He's 2.82 blocks per game, 98th percentile in blocks. Also now 98th percentile in goal production. 3 goals in 11 games this year. So I don't think that's sustainable, but if he's going to do it right now, this is another one of those McCabe type files where you're getting a hits and blocks defenseman who's also offensively productive right now. So there's a couple of those guys that you can target that we've looked at in this video. I'm not going to go through every single player on this list. You can see a lot of them. You can see their ownership percentages right here. And if we clear out these filters, you can see the total leaderboard since December 3rd, under 70% ownership. If we clear that out, there are a couple more options. Guys that you can target in different league formats. For whatever reason, Bo Horvat was available in my league. I couldn't make room for him. 15 points in his last 10 games. He's got 5 power play points, 2 power play goals. Just killing it right now. +7. and he's been getting Barzell activated on that line. They've been very productive this year. The Islanders are scoring right now, so you do have to pay attention to that. Guys like Nugent Hopkins are finally getting going. That Oilers power play is getting going. Mark Stone has been very productive, 14 points in his last 10. We've covered a number of these guys before. Val Nichushkin, another guy in the 80s in terms of percentile ownership. I don't know if we have him over here yet, 87 percentile, and he's been getting it done, so a huge jump here. And then as he's continued to grow, hasn't been coming back down to earth, so 12 points in 9 games is really good for a guy who's typically known for riding shotgun on that power play. And one other guy we have to mention is Jacob Chychrun, and I was holding on to him for a while through the lean times. He wasn't scoring for a while, but he's been absolutely dominant over the last number of games, especially in assists. 12 points in his last 10, 11 of those are assists, 3 power play points in that span, 19 shots, which you do target him for shot volume because he is usually higher than that. But for whatever reason, it hasn't necessarily been a shot volume goal scoring thing as it usually is for him. But he is 96th percentile in points, 95th in goals, 95th in assists, 93rd in shot volume, and 95th in power play points per game. He's also 68th percentile at 1.69 blocks per game. So he's a guy that is going to get that beneficial schedule from here on out with Ottawa playing a ton of games down the stretch. They just aren't very good, unfortunately. But with CHATBOT out, he's been getting a little bit more power play time, which has been helpful. So if he's available in your shallow league, I would definitely go out and grab him. And then there's a couple of other guys. Rasmus Andersson, only 76% owned, despite the fact that he's one of the most complete defensemen in general. So right about an 80 on the completeness rating, which is good for around 41st on the completeness hub. So he's one of the top 40 players in general, let alone defensemen. So he's definitely a guy you would want to target. Now, what he's good for is you're getting a lot of blocks. 98th percentile, 2.77 blocks per game. 91st percentile in shots, 90th in goals, 90th in points per game. So he's been doing a lot in terms of, just getting a lot of blocks and then some offensive production on top of that. 6 points in his last 10. The shooting percentage is reasonable. Nothing crazy to scaring you off there. So 76% ownership. He's definitely a guy you would want to target. Now, we'll just very quickly look at the sum of the total change over this time span from top to bottom. The number one guy is Sam Malinsky. I never heard of him, to be honest with you, until I'm doing this analysis. He's a Colorado defenseman, 0% owned, a goal, 4 assists, a power play point, 14 shots, 5 hits, 15 blocks on the season. And he's obviously been jumping up a lot. So this is where you get some of those data anomalies where he had almost nothing in terms of his file. And then he starts to produce, and then he jumps crazy high, 20 points from December 10th to the 17th, and then continues that a little bit further on. Nothing crazy over the last number of games, only 1 assist in the last 5, but there was a stretch there where that, 10th to the 17th, where he put up 3 assists and a goal in that span, a number of shots and some hits and blocks along the way. So really, really deep leagues, you might want to take a look at Sam Malinsky. But there's not a whole lot that we didn't cover. There's guys that we did, Sharangovich, Chinakhov, etc., Ehlers, Eklund, some of these guys. So we're not going to go too much into detail. Instead, what we're going to do is take a look at the goaltending. Basically the same analysis, only the goaltenders that have improved week over week from December 3rd until now. So now that we're looking at the goalie hub, on the bottom right of the screen are the only goaltenders that have improved every week from the 3rd until the 24th. So these are guys that are continuously improving. I don't have the graphs for these guys. It would have been a nightmare to try to put this together because I'm sourcing from so many different places to get this information. But one thing we can notice from the top is that there's 2 Winnipeg Jets goaltenders at the top, and the Jets are number 1 over this time span with 1.89 goals against per game. So Jets goaltending has been really productive, and you're definitely not going to get Connor Hellebuck, but you could get Laurent Brossoit. He has a .911 save percentage. The team exposure, 75th percentile. That's come up a lot because of this last 3-week stretch where they're number 1 in the league. So he's a number 1 streaming option for you. If you have the ability to stream him any night this week where he's playing, that would be one of your best pickup options, at least just based on the data. He's changed 25 points up to a 50 now on the goalie hub rating. Because of that, we can also take a look at Connor Hellebuck, who's now number 2 in terms of goaltenders on this list. He's got a 918 right now. That's really nice. 16 wins, 93rd percentile there. 2.4 goals against. He's 12.9 above expected as well. So you're getting a lot of the same stuff that you would normally get out of Connor Hellebuck. And I mentioned him in the preseason as one of those guys who's consistently in the top 10 on the goalie rankings board. And this is why, because you're going to get this level of play from him most of the time. Now, you also have Casey DeSmith in here. And DeSmith, coming over to Vancouver, this has been a nice story. You obviously know that Demko's third on this list. And as I bring up DeSmith's numbers, you can see that the team exposure is pretty good at 70th percentile there. But he's also 5.1 above expected. He's got a 920 save percentage and a 2.5 goals against on the season. So he's been really productive in a small sample size, not getting a ton of games played. He's got 6 wins, though, which is really nice if you're in a points league and you're getting some wins out of that. But obviously that tandem, Demko and DeSmith, have been really good. You can see Hellebuck and Brossoit. So these two guys at the top, their backups are also very productive for you as well. One thing that I've noticed in terms of the Montreal goaltending, all of their goaltenders are seemingly outperforming their metrics that they should be. So goals saved above expected, if I could spell Primo. Caden Primo is basically a third stringer, and their defense isn't great. So 17th percentile there, but he is above expected. 902 save percentage is not bad. 3.2 goals against. As I bring it further down, we can find some of these other Montreal goaltenders. You have Jake Allen. He's above expected, 2.0 goals above expected. And when you look at, I believe it was Mike Kelly on Twitter showing the stolen wins by goaltending. You had Montembeault on that list, you had Primo, and you had Jake Allen all on that list because they're not a great defensive team, but they do play pretty well in net. So Primo way down here, Jake Allen down here as well because of a lot of the exposure to the team, not getting a ton of starts, but if he is playing for whatever reason, he has been relatively productive. But another guy that we want to take a look at is Vitek Vanacek, and this was something that I was talking about a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the Devils goaltending potentially improving. Now, it hasn't come, this is not a humongous increase week over week, 0.79, 3.13, 3.91, but it is worth noting because they do need somebody in net in New Jersey. They just haven't been getting the same level of goaltending, or defense, I should say, that they were getting last year. They're up to 58th percentile in team defense, but he's minus 8.8 above expected. So really not playing up to even just an average level goaltender, which is what they would need. And they would probably be a playoff team if they were getting that right now. So 87th percentile in terms of wins and 88th percentile in terms of starts. I'm sorry, the other way around. But, he does start a lot. He does get some wins. They get a lot of run support, which is good for their goaltending. But 884 save percentage is going to kill you in a categories league. And then that goal saved above expected number is showing that he's not a very skilled goaltender right now. It doesn't have it going, but he has been improving week over week at least. And the same can't be said for Schmid, who has been regressing a little bit, minus 5.5 over the last week. He's been down, they same defense in front of him, but a little bit better in terms of goal saved above expected. He's right around a 4, minus 4. The save percentage is a little bit better. He's not getting the bulk of the starts. That's the reason why he's a little bit lower than Vanacek. But whoever is playing, the Devils' defense has been improving. I believe they're up to 3.3 goals against per game expected right now. So this is 3.2. It's a little bit below that, so 3.29 or whatever it was. But the Devils are playing a little bit better defensively. They definitely give you the run support there. The goaltending just hasn't been up to snuff, and that's why they're on the outside looking in at a playoff spot. And then finally, this is a guy that you're not going to pick up, but Sorokin has been coming back to form. If I can uncheck Schmid, then we can pick up Sorokin. And I just want to show you this because he has been underperforming at various points throughout the season. The defense isn't the same that it used to be. We're expecting that Islanders defense to be really good, and it hasn't been. But with that said, 8.3 above expected, tons of save volume because that defense has been terrible. 914 save percentage is really nice. 2 shutouts, 3.1 goals against. So this is a file that I would look at earlier in the season, and I'd tell you that Varlamov was the better option. Right now, Varlamov has kind of gone back a little bit. He's still above expected, 5.6 above expected. The total save volume is lower because he's not getting as many starts or wins because of that, but a 919 save percentage. So these are some options for you in terms of goalie streaming. You could pick up Brossoit, DeSmith, Primo, Vanacek might even be there for you, although his ownership is pretty high. You can maybe grab Schmid. And then you also have Sorokin, who's playing much better, and his backup, Varlamov, who is another option. Now, speaking of some goalie ads, we do have to talk about Kochetkov, who's not on this list, because when he sucks, he really does suck. But when he's on, he's very on. So I mentioned that last time. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but his wins in the games that he's winning, his save percentage is like a 950. But when he loses, his save percentage is like a 600 or 700. It's crazy bad when it's bad, and it's crazy good when it's good. So if you're in a points league, that's where you would use Kochetkov. If you're in a categories league, he might ruin your goaltending categories for you. The team exposure is what you want. He is well below expected, which is the problem. 894 save percentage isn't going to help either. So as I mentioned, those phenomena where he's playing particularly bad when he's playing bad and losing, that's going to hurt you in a categories league, but in a points league, it's not going to kill you, and he is providing you some value. He is the starter right now in Carolina. And then we do also have to talk about Joey Daccord, who's 9.7 increase week over week from the 17th to the 24th. He's been a very nice story out of Seattle. They've had Grubauer down with injury. They bring in Daccord. They're playing really good defensively, 92nd percentile there, 2.8 expected goals against. He is below expected, but he's got a 912 save percentage and a 2.5 goals against. So that is definitely targetable. And he has been, in one of our Discord members, he's one of the top 3 players over the last week or two in fantasy because of his scoring format. So depending on your format, if you're getting points for total saves, if you're getting a shutout here in one of these games over here for Daccord, so if you're getting stuff like that, he's been even more valuable. But I would even own him in a categories league with the way he's been playing lately, and he's probably available for you as he's only 34% owned. So really low ownership. That is kind of crazy to think about for a starting goaltender right now. So he's definitely an option for you. Daccord, 72 on the goalie hub. He is top 10 in terms of this goalie hub, and he's 34% owned. So that's why we're mentioning him here. But that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you got something out of this. This was a little bit of an unorthodox format, but we'll be back to regular scheduled programming next week. We just had to kind of get around the fact that there's not a whole lot we can do this week in terms of the schedule. So just wanted to highlight some of the top players that are trending right now, some of the top performers in December as we head into 2024. These are the guys that you might want to take a look at for kind of rest of season or a little bit longer term holds. So hopefully you got some value out of this. If you did, let me know in the comments section below. But that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.